Okay, so I will go ahead and admit that this wasn't my original idea for wrapping up my Pride Month series, but I went on vacation over the weekend and didn't have much time to record anything before I left, but I didn't want to leave this series hanging like I had with my Oscar nominations watch through. But hey, everyone's making jokes about July being LGBT Wrath Month, so I'm going to post it anyway. But yeah, my original idea was to do an essay on LGBT representation in media as a whole, which I will still get around to at some point, but instead, I decided to end with something a little more lighthearted to wrap up this series. So, as the title is already telling you, I'm going to be listing my 5 favorite movies for Pride. This is a list going off my personal enjoyment of these and not a list based off of quality. So no hard feelings if something that you like or dislike is higher or lower than what you'd place it on your own metrics. Kicking off this movie is the aptly named Pride, a 2014 drama that circles around the life of 20-year-old Joe, a closeted gay man who goes to a London Pride parade in 1984 during the height of the England miners' strike. At the parade, he meets a ragtag group of gay and lesbian activists, led by Mark Ashton, who put together an initiative to raise money in support for the miners after realizing that they share a common enemy in Margaret Thatcher, the police, and conservative politicians. The group chooses the name Lesbians and Gays Support the Miners, or LGSM for short, and travel back and forth from London to a small mining community in Wales to raise support for the miners and awareness for gay rights in the town. Pride also touches on the start of the AIDS epidemic, and although it's not the central point or driving plot of the movie, it still handles the topic with care and puts into reality just how personal the epidemic was for so many gay men throughout the 80s and 90s. Now, I will admit that if you're not super familiar with the politics or history surrounding the miners' strike, this movie can be a little weird to sit through, but a quick Google search before I can clear that up, and you'll be on your way to enjoying a feel-good historical drama. Surprise, surprise, a lesbian has But I'm a Cheerleader on a list of movie recommendations, but seriously, this one is a classic, and no Pride movie list is complete without it. If you're one of the 3 people left in the world who somehow haven't seen this movie, But I'm a Cheerleader follows the story of 17-year-old Megan, who was sent to a conversion camp when her parents and friends suspect that she might be a lesbian. There, she meets and falls in love with another lesbian named Graham, and they try to keep their love under wraps to avoid abandonment from their families. To the 3 people who still haven't seen this movie, I know that sounds like a super dark drama, but this is actually a comedy. The colorful and artificial palette of the True Directions conversion camp matched with the campy humor and acting really makes for another feel-good movie that was the first lesbian movie for myself and probably 500,000 other lesbians in the world. Not much to say on this one other than that. It's coming up on its 20th anniversary next year, so check it out and keep your fingers crossed that they put it back on Hulu sometime soon or we get a special edition release next year. This 1985 classic isn't usually known for its focus on lesbianism in the movie, but the book presents an entirely different angle. By now, everyone knows the story of Miss Seeley, a poor black woman who is sold off to marry a man named Mr. and raises children and is badly abused by him. The only saving grace in her life is her little sister Nettie, who is unfortunately run off by Mr. at the start of the movie. Later in life, Seeley meets Shug, an old flame of Mr.'s, and while the movie glosses over it, the book goes into depth about their sexual and romantic relationship. Even though the lesbian aspects of the book are washed away in the movie, it's still a beautiful story about a group of women who are never truly represented in any positive light. It's an amazing story about surviving abuse, family trauma, and discovering how to love yourself. It's become such a cultural icon within the film and black community that it's honestly surprising to me that it's never really included in any lesbian film list despite the significance and representation of black women and sexuality. If you somehow haven't seen this movie, I highly suggest that you watch it and try to read the book afterwards. Both are iconic within their own right, and even though the movie skims over the exploration of sexuality, it's still worth being on this list in my opinion. Tangerine is probably one of the more grounded and unique films on this list. Shot on 3 iPhones, Tangerine uses a Los Angeles backdrop to follow a day in the life of 2 trans sex workers, Cinderella, who just got back from a 30-day stint in jail, and Alexandra, her best friend. When Alexandra tells Cindy that her boyfriend/pimp named Chester cheated on her while she was in jail, Cindy sets off to find Chester's side piece, and a wide array of shenanigans kick off throughout the day. I've mentioned before in previous reviews that a lot of movies try and fail to follow a day-to-day pace of the characters' lives, but Tangerine manages to pull that off and keep the movie grounded without going on for 3 hours or getting so dull that you want to check to see how much time is left until it's over. I will admit that it took me 2 watches for me to be able to fully appreciate what Tangerine does with its characters, settings, and stories, but I still recommend it. It might be a little out there and more controversial than the other picks on this list, but the sincerity in the performances and relationships between the characters make it an interesting and entertaining watch. I really tried to keep this list down to one historical movie, but this one's just too good for me not to include it. Milk is a historical biopic that follows the 3 campaigns, election, and assassination of former San Francisco City Council member Harvey Milk, who was the first openly gay man in history to hold public office. But unlike Pride, Milk doesn't leave you on a high note with a warm and fuzzy feeling in your stomach of it gets better, because as I stated, it follows Milk through the last couple years of his life to his assassination by fellow City Council member Dan White. It's a lot more brutal than Pride, as this movie contains scenes of homophobia and a scene showing showing a suicide victim, so proceed with caution, or at the very least, watch this with a friend. But that aside, this is a really, really great movie with amazing performances, direction, and of course, a great story. If there's anything wrong with it, it's that it tends to dip into the boringness that can come up with historical pieces like this. And again, like Pride, has some historical and political aspects to it that can make it confusing if you aren't familiar with this specific piece of history. But that aside, this is a really great movie, and it isn't just one of my favorite movies for Pride, but one of my top 10 favorite movies of all time. Are there any of your favorite Pride movies on this list? Did I give you something new to watch for next year or this weekend? Let me know down in the comments or on Twitter, and thank you again if you've been watching my videos for the entire month, and I'll see you again soon with my review of The Incredibles 2.